So something I've been asked to do for quite a little bit now, and something I've actually implied that I would do in older videos, is a benefits of dyspraxia video. The problem is that I really don't discuss specifically drawbacks or benefits to dyspraxia. What I do is I talk about certain features of dyspraxia and how they can be perceived as both bad and good features. And this is just how everything in the world kind of is. There's really a positive or a negative spin you can put on just about anything. This is a large part as to why my videos are so deadpan and not as heavily political as they really could be. And it's simply put, I try to look at dyspraxia from an objective point of view. And obviously looking at something that is a disability like dyspraxia, there is going to be a sort of negative tone and negative intonation in a lot of the topics I talk about because they do kind of refer to a disability. But even some of the biggest negatives I've talked about, like anxiety, can also be somewhat of a positive, especially for someone who works in retail or works somewhere where a high level of anxiety is actually somewhat of a benefit. So it really all depends on how you view certain things, but there is a couple of things that are relative universal positives involving dyspraxia, and in this video I'm going to talk about one of them. So let's talk a little bit about intelligence. Are we more intelligent? And if so, why and how? And really, honestly, we have to define what exactly intelligence is to begin with. And this is where kind of doing a video on intelligence has taken me so long to make. See, the problem with actually answering that question is, well, defining what exactly intelligence is and how we choose to measure it. And while I would love to say that the IQ test is a good indicator, it kind of isn't scientifically backed to the full extent. And there are many skeptics of the whole IQ system. And, you know, there are a bunch of studies that show racial biases and everything. So I'm really trying not to get political in my videos, especially after that last one. So measuring intelligence in general is even harder to do than even if you do consider the IQ test. Because, well, human intelligence is specialized. We all focus on different things and we're all really good at certain things. We're all really intelligent in certain ways. And for instance, most people consider me relatively intelligent, but at the same time, I've never been behind the wheel of a vehicle. So if you ask me anything about cars, I'm not going to sound as intelligent. And while we can, I guess, use the things that we do know and how many of the things we do know as a possible scale for intelligence, that still doesn't take into effect what most people would consider street smarts or having some semblance of relative wisdom when going about things in the world. And even then, that's even harder to measure. Really, the only way we tend to gauge intelligence is based on how many things somebody may know that most people don't know. And, you know, knowing obscure facts may make you really good at Jeopardy, but it's not going to get you very far, although quantum physics might. So in all actuality, I'm not really going to talk about how we are specifically intelligent or more intelligent than somebody else, because I can't really say whether or not that's true. I don't know exactly how to measure intelligence, and I don't think anyone really does. But we definitely do give off the appearance that we are more intelligent than others, and in not a very egotistical way either, but in kind of Joe Rogan, Bill Nye kind of way. And well, that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. So initially, when trying to figure out where this intelligence comes from, or where just about anything comes from, what we try to do is find some sort of correlation to make a hypothesis from. This is basic science. And then we need to test that correlation. Now, while I'm not able to actually test any hypotheses, at least within the context of this YouTube video, I would at least like to bring up the discussion because it is an interesting discussion to have. And it's really an understated science as to where intelligence comes from, or at least our perception of said intelligence. So who do we as a general public consider most intelligent? Well, mainly scientists, even doctors to some extent, but we can lump them in with scientists because, well, doctors are kind of scientists. People with dyspraxia, obviously, that's something I see a lot, and I honestly perceive many of us as intelligent as well. I go through the Discord, and it's like watching a whole bunch of nerds talk, which, you know, is relatively intelligent. Also, people with autism, too, are also seen to be relatively more intelligent, especially those of the Asperger's variety. Certain radio hosts like Joe Rogan and Ben Shapiro are also seen as relatively intelligent because of the way they talk or how they talk. And this is one of the main threads that I want to pull from, is the speech in general. The one thing all of these people have in common is they do have a skill in speaking to some extent. Whether it's a scientist speaking to the public, a doctor speaking to patients or residents, or, you know, someone who has dyspraxia or has autism that speaks a certain way or learns to speak a certain way. And as I touched on a little bit in my one video on the dyspraxic social life, there's a lot in the way that human beings speak that does give off intelligence, notably us dyspraxics as well. The human brain really likes to make connections, and it's the connections that we make and the correlations that we make in our mind that dictate our logic and everything that dictates how we go about in life and the way we see the world around us. It all kind of falls back on this carnal knowledge that insists on making these immediate connections. And because of these connections usually having some sort of bias based on environmental factors or otherwise, most individuals tend to just kind of believe what they see or believe what they hear. And while critical thinking is a skill that many individuals have, and I think all individuals have to some extent, critical thinking usually requires a sizable amount of thought before one's mind can be made on a subject. And with dyspraxia, I think a lot of this just kind of comes from how we perceive certain things. And then after we talk about these things, after seeing them in such a critical light, because we're kind of forced to critically think about things, we talk about it in such a way that it comes off as more intelligent because it has a little bit more forethought behind it. And in this respect, it's not even entirely more intelligent than anything. It's just having a little bit more time to think about something. But also still being forced to think about that thing too. Because you have to keep in mind that while we are critically thinking at almost all times, that means it's taking us time to actually receive the original thought, and that time is time that can be spent speaking or trying to prove a point. Typically, most people see this intelligence in individuals after they've talked to them for a sizable amount of time, or have spent a sizable amount of time with them where they've been able to talk to them for a long amount of time. And this is where I think a lot of intelligence does seem to come from, is just about everyone, even though they're specialists, has something to teach everyone else. We're all going through such vastly different life scenarios that we're always learning something new. The whole sentiment that you're learning something new every day is entirely true, and absolutely nobody is disputing that. And I've seen a fair amount of Ask Reddit threads that say, you know, common knowledge, what'd you just learn recently that you're surprised you didn't know about? And these things are really popular. I don't really think there's such a thing as common knowledge. I think we're all a lot more intelligent than people allow us to be. And the only reason dyspraxics, people with autism, and scientists and doctors really get to show off their intelligence is because usually they're put in positions where they're able to speak for long amounts of time and spread the information that they know. And especially when you're having a discussion with another individual, like on the Joe Rogan Experience, there you have someone who can be a check and balance and can correct you if they're wrong from any sort of perspective. Or if you do feel strongly about a perspective, you can have a discussion on it. Now, granted, some people do kind of argue, and a lot of that is confirmation bias and a whole bunch of biases in the brain, but I think just about everyone argues in that respect. It's kind of how we are. We do hold certain political ideologies and religious ideologies and even sports teams relatively close to us. But honestly, all of the best intelligent discussion comes from within the speech of two individuals speaking, or one individual speaking to a crowd, or even a moderated debate. We're just kind of always put in a position where we're forced to think before we speak constantly while we're speaking at all times. And so that does kind of give off an air of intelligence. And, you know, due to the fact that we do tend to spend a lot of time alone and in our heads, we do spend a lot of time overthinking things too. And to some extent, this can be a negative because it can lead to anxiety as well. But, you know, you spend a lot of time at home alone on the internet, especially on Wikipedia or whatever, like some people do, then yeah, you're in for a lot of learning about really obscure stuff. But then again, all the knowledge that I have on stuff that I've picked up, like reading Wikipedia and stuff, really isn't the same as being a brain surgeon or being a mechanic or being some specialist in any sort of field of medicine. Just means I know a sizable amount of knowledge that may or may not help someone one day. Otherwise, it's mainly just a fun fact or two to throw around with friends and kind of be fun at parties. So it's definitely a positive, and really there's not too much negative to the whole intelligence thing. Again, if there is some sort of scientific measurement of intelligence that people base Mensa and stuff off of, I mean, typically we are shown to have relatively high IQs. So yeah, I guess subjectively, based on statistics, we are definitely more intelligent. But again, try to keep in mind, don't be too cocky about it, because we still are human beings. All of us are. And we're always going to be limited by human knowledge. No one will ever know everything there is to know about everything in the universe, unfortunately. And while we can come up with philosophies and answers and, you know, quantum mechanics and all that, no one will ever truly know. What a lot of people don't realize is that even the observable universe, or as much of the universe as we can see, is really huge. And even then, many scientists theorize that it's expanding, and we definitely cannot conceptualize the overall size of the universe with our feeble human minds. We are essentially intelligently stupid, and that's okay. And I feel like another large part of that, you know, intelligence that many of us, including scientists and dyspraxics alike, tend to give off is just the willingness to accept our ignorance and the willingness to be willing to learn more and be willing to expand more on concepts when we're faced with them. We'll never know the full extent of anything, and there's actually a funny scenario. It's actually a paradox of sorts, but it's also a cognitive bias. It's called the Dunning-Kruger Effect. Essentially, it states that the more sure you are that you're knowledgeable of something, the least you actually know about it. And there definitely is some science behind this, because there really is no way to truly know everything about anything. And eventually, once someone has really learned as much as they can about a topic, they eventually hit a point where they realize, okay, this is even way too complex for me to even understand. And as I talked about in emotions with dyspraxia, usually it takes us time to feel just about anything from any stimulus, especially when we're learning something new. So our emotions are relatively detached from what we're learning about, and so we're less likely to be prone to certain cognitive biases. Now, yeah, we definitely are prone to cognitive biases still. In fact, more prone to some than others. But because there's very little confirmation bias, we tend to see things from an objective view and be well aware that there's no way we'll ever know the full extent of said topic. So just having a general objective view of the world is kind of one of our biggest strengths that leads to this kind of sort of knowledge, so to speak, or this intelligence. But again, once you get to a certain point, you really aren't as intelligent, and in turn that makes you intelligent. It's kind of a weird philosophical dilemma. Another large part of where the intelligence comes from is just being disabled in general. And I think this is a lot of where the, intelligence from autism tends to come from, because of the relative social distance that many people with autism tend to have. But I mean, I can only speak for myself personally. And even as someone who's tried enlisting in the military and went a couple of months in the military, I've found that I've really been unable to partake in many very physical hobbies. Even playing the guitar for a couple hours will really wear me out. So usually I turn to more conceptual hobbies over physical ones. Things like chess and binge reading Wikipedia and playing Minecraft. And in turn, doing a lot of these topics, it's kind of like in a sim or an RPG. You're just kind of leveling up your intelligence skill to some extent there. So, that's all the factors that are in play, at least from what I've seen, at least with how my dyspraxia takes into effect. And in turn, a lot of people consider me intelligent, which I appreciate. But again, we can really only be as intelligent as human knowledge will let us be. And I'm really not trying to downplay too much or be cynical about it. It's just kind of, you have to accept certain things are a part of the way of life, unfortunately. And, we'll never know everything. But for what we do know, we tend to know a lot. And that's worth a lot, especially when it comes to wisdom and giving life advice and hopefully following our own life advice if our impulsivity doesn't get the best of us first. But yeah, that's it for this video. This video took me forever to get to and forever to make, but I really wanted to make it. It just took a lot of, conceptualizing and actually putting all my thoughts in one video, which is really hard to do. And, like I said, my last video was fighting pneumonia for a while, so I still have that residual cough, and I don't know if you guys can tell, my voice still hasn't fully recovered. But yeah, that's it for this video, everyone. That's about it. We're all really smart. Woo! You guys, have a good one.